This is Chiming In. So you're probably one of the best known sports doctors in the country. You've done some stitching over the years, Doc.
Actually done a lot of stitching, and because I'm sort of often available 24/7, I've done a lot of stitching at home after hours. Not that we need to talk about those scenarios. He got kneed in the back and broke, I think, 4 ribs in 8 places. So his chest was all out of whack. He was coughing up blood. It's coming out his mouth.
Kangaroo team is picked. Wally Lewis is named in that team and has to pass a medical, and you ruled him out of the tour.
So we had some x-rays done, and I looked at the x-rays, and his forearm was still clearly angulated and broken. And he was okay about it until he got a microphone in his hand. That changed things a little bit. And so on the side of the field, we started doing CPR, then got the defibrillator and tried to revive him. And unfortunately, despite numerous efforts at trying to revive him, he never regained consciousness.
Dr. Nathan Gibbs, thanks for joining us on Chiming In.
Well done, Chimes. Actually, 2 alumni from the great Marsden College, I do believe.
Great man of God, Champagne, shone with zeal.
Yeah.
Glory.
We've made it this far, which is quite good.
Have a lot of success stories out of Marsden College.
No, there were.
Yeah.
It was a great rugby league nursery, really.
That's right. Now, Doc, you're a few years older than me, although you look 20 years younger than me. Mate, welcome. An accomplished rugby league player who went on to become a doctor. It's a great story. Tell us about your early days in rugby league and how you had to make that commitment to becoming a doctor.
Actually, it was interesting. I was a young guy. We had actually my family history. My dad left early, and my 5 siblings. My mum brought us up. We lived with our grandmother. Didn't have a car, so we just lived in Coogee. And so our life was sort of walking or catching the bus, like you in many ways, being involved in Coogee Surf Club, going to Coogee Oval to see the great Randwick Rugby play, and then catching the bus to the SCG to see South play the match of the day on Saturday. And that was, how I started playing, being involved in loving the great South Sydney and rugby league. And I was lucky enough as a youngster to, I must have got the attraction of some of the guys playing junior rugby league for La Perouse. And Lapa Stewart, and many of you would have heard of or known of, I was coaching the under-13s, and the Ella brothers were playing for them. So I had a couple of years in rugby league with La Perouse, which was fantastic. And then obviously at Marsden, I was going through, and I was pretty good at school, so that was handy. And my mother was always massive on, us kids, her kids getting good education. And Bill Anderson in our Year 12 year was the coach of East under-23s back in those days, and I was only 17. And he asked me if I'd play with the East under-23s team. And I asked my mother, I said, "Oh, Pam, what do you think about that?" And she said, "I don't care what you do as long as you still do your study." And so that was the focus. I catch the bus to the old sports ground, do my training, come home, do plenty of study, and get my HSC mark.
So you obviously did well in the HSC. Had you thought about becoming a doctor prior to getting your results? Was there a moment where you gone, I'd like to be a doctor one day?
Actually, I wish I had a story like that. The reality is I was good enough. In those days, all the subjects at university were graded from best to worst. And I got a mark where I was able to get in the top-notch subject. And so I said, well, what's number 1? Is it law? Is it medicine? What is it? And they said, it's medicine. And I said, I might as well go for the hardest one to get into. I'll do that. And it's as simple as that.
So you had no other inkling to do medicine other than that mark steered you there?
The mark got me into it. And then when I was playing footy, and going to university, and I had a few injuries, obviously, like all players do. And I must admit, I was disappointed with the standard of care, generally speaking. And I thought, surely it's got to be better than this. So that probably prompted me to definitely want to continue in medicine, but get into sports medicine. And it was quite just good luck, I suppose. In the year I started, working as a doctor in 85, the College of Sports Doctors, the foundation meeting of the College of Sports Doctors happened, which I was able to go to. And so I was a foundation member of that college, which is now a massively strong organisation that trains people as sports physicians, which I was lucky to be part of at the very beginning. But it's that really changed the way that teams approached their medical care for sporting teams. I remember when I finished playing, Terry Parker looked after me very much at Souths because I didn't have a father. He was the CEO. And I remember once when I was playing reasonably well and I signed a 3-year contract, and he said to me, "Nathan, I know you're going through uni. You can work at the club part-time as a doorman, get some money. You're not going to see a cent of your contract money," which you obviously do with your players now, Chimes, of course.
100%.
Yeah, never see a cent of your contract money. And in 3 years, I'll give you the keys to a house in Beaconsfield, in a Sydney.
So he's like a pseudo agent for you at the time.
Well, he was like the person employing me, but also managing my money. And he was so good how he managed it and what he did for me. Forever indebted to him. And so that was sort of how it evolved. And then Terry Parker, the same Terry, when I finished playing at 24, because it was getting too hard to football back in those days was still amateurish. It was people had jobs, late 70s, early 80s. People trained early, 6 to 8 a.m. gym sort of sessions, came back about 4 p.m. to do field work. That was a typical, and all the people, even the coaches, had daytime jobs. Yet in the early 80s, and Bozo was the person who probably changed it first at the Roosters, he started, and other clubs followed suit, bringing players in during the daytime. So it became harder it was relatively easy doing university work, but once you had to work as a junior doctor, you were sort of flogged in the hospital system.
You had to keep the brain ticking over. You had to study, you had to learn. I guess whilst some guys were working for the council or being policemen or whatever, that's your downtime was your study.
I always have a good story. I used to be terrified running out at Lidcombe Oval against Roy Masters' Western Suburbs team because you just get eaten alive. And if the team didn't get you, the crowd certainly did.
Yeah.
So we'd be walking into a final exam and everyone's nervous, and I was as relaxed as anything. And I'd just say, look, it ain't as bad as Lidcombe Oval. Trust me, this exam's not going to be. This is a walk in the park.
What happened to Billy Anderson? How did he not keep you at the Roosters? Because you're an exceptional player. As you said, you were there playing under 23s at age 17.
Yeah, no, it was.
How did you slip through the Roosters? Although you obviously said you had a love for South.
The main reason, Jack Gibson took over South Sydney in 78, and Bill Anderson went with Jack that following year to be second grade coach at South Sydney. And he obviously, after Jack, went on to become the first grade coach. And I had an affiliation, and Bill liked me as a player, and I liked him as a coach. So I swapped over to Souths in 78 and met the great Jack. That was an experience.
Did the Roosters try and keep you?
In those days, under 23s,
a minnow, eh?
I was a minnow, and I'm not sure about I'm not sure if the big hat was around in those days. Maybe it was.
So Jack obviously took a shine to you, and as I mentioned, you're an exceptional player. But you went on to captain South Sydney. You went on to pick up a Dalian Back Row of the Year award. And
actually, maybe the first one, maybe the inaugural, 1980.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was on the back. It was interesting. I won that award, which was fantastic, but it was on the back of the great Rocky Laurie, who's unfortunately passed away. He won the Player of the Year in 1980. And he was a great ball player, and I could hit a hole and run. And I ran for the space, and he gave it to me. So we had a great rapport.
So the team must be relatively competitive in that season?
1980, we had a great run home. I think we won 9 out of 10 games to come. In those days, there were only 12 teams, and it was top 5. So we snuck into 5th spot, and so made the finals, which was very big for Souths in those days.
What was Jack like as a coach?
Scary. He was scary. But he had messages that are lifelong messages that I've taken with me and I've bored my kids with. And so when people have that effect on you, they certainly have an impact. Things like we'd train, most games were on a Sunday, and we'd have a Saturday 8 a.m. training session. And obviously in those days, a lot of people went out Friday night drinking. So we had a policy, if you're late, if you went there at 8 o'clock, you did not play Sunday. It didn't matter who you were. And he had this saying, he said, look, if it's important enough to you, you'll be there on time. And he'd use the example, he said, if I offered you $1 million to be a trainee at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, everyone would be there, you'd sleep overnight. That's because you want the million. That's really important. So if you're not going to turn up for your mates, if you're going to let your mates down, not going to turn up at 8 o'clock, I'm not going to pick you. And that sort of it was a really clear-cut lesson. And the other great one he had, which I love, Mick Suter used to have in those days, was he was ahead of his time. He was a great conditioner, and he went everywhere Jack went. And in the off-season, they'd put the cones around the footy field in a circular pattern, and he'd be doing laps around the cones. And Big Jack would wander out in December and just watch us all doing the laps around the cones for the repeat 400s and those sorts of things. And he'd watch for anyone stepping inside the cone. And he'd wait till the first trial game, and he'd be deciding between you and me, and he'd say, I'm thinking of who's going to play back row, Nathan or Stephen. And Steve, I remember in December that we were doing some 400 repeat sets, and you stepped inside the cone. You took a shortcut. I'm not going to pick you.
Wow.
And we can't have a player taking shortcuts, giving away penalties because he's not going back far enough in defence, and the referee picks on him, missing a tackle because he's taking a shortcut. And everyone was scared as anything after that. Everyone went around the cone. There was no one ducking inside.
So great career at South, a lot of fun, good times. No premierships or anything, but
oh, excuse me, 81 Tooth Cup.
Oh, beg your
grand
pardon.
Final. Sorry.
You better
mate.
take us through it, Doc.
Well, it was actually, I'm not sure if they had betting in those days, but if you're a betting man, the weekend after we won the Wednesday night Tooth Cup, I would have been, you would have laid Souths massively. Yeah. We were no hope of winning because it was our first big premiership for a long time. And so we were just, the club stayed open all night. It was fantastic. We beat Cronulla in the final.
Right.
And
some of your teammates back then?
Yeah, and I remember it might have been the first game in the Tooth Cup. Dean Rampling, he was a rugged front row who you know well, and then his brother Tony played for South, so great players. Dean was, his debut in first grade was up against Craig Young for St George, Australian captain, renowned first grade front row. And the first scrum, all in brawl. And Dean's fighting Craig Young, and everyone else is sort of trying to pull them apart. And we won the game, which was good. And after the game, I said, Dean, what are you doing? What are you thinking, mate? You've first scrum, you've taken on the Australian captain in front row. What are you, mad or something? He said he pulled my ear. No one pulls my ear. And that was a great story. It's just and after that, everyone left Dean alone. Yeah. No one ever upset him.
They were wild, courageous, tough boys, weren't they?
The Rampling brothers, they were fantastic.
But a lot of guys that played for South back then had not tough upbringings, but grew up tough, didn't they?
Yeah, I think that was part of what made, and rugby league was probably the blue collar worker game. It was the bloke who was on the beer truck, lifted kegs all day, and then came to training. They were tough players, and they played hard. In the 70s, I don't think there were even interchanges or reserves. So people got hurt, they stayed on the field. It was that sort of, you didn't want to let your team down. So there was a lot of that happening, and that was, that was how, as a young player come in, that's a sort of, obviously it slowly changed through the 80s and 90s, but in the late 70s, early 80s, it was still a very tough game to be part of.
So later on, after your famous Tooth Cup win,
in 81, thank you.
Right. You went to Parramatta. How did that come about, and how did Terry Parker agree to let you go?
Actually, that was Ron Willie had taken over the coaching, who I didn't see as, who didn't like me as much as, perhaps Bill Anderson had. And he'd also started to bring training earlier in the day to midday type sessions, and I was working at Concord Hospital. So it was actually and my contract had finished. So I was off contract. So I wouldn't have been able to make the South Sydney sessions regularly. It would have mucked work up too much. And so I rang, you weren't around in those days to help me, Stevie G. So on my own, I rang Peter, who was Fitzgerald? Who was it?
Dennis Fitzgerald.
Dennis Fitzgerald,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Peter might have been his
So
brother.
you did your own deal.
Own deal.
I could have got you more.
I know. Sorry, mate. Sorry. So I rang him up and said, mate, I've got to work at Concord. That's close to Parramatta. I'd be able to commute easy after work, get to training, blah, blah, blah. And so he gave me a 1-year deal to play there, which was good. They had my Tommy Gibbs, who's pretty good on the stats, as you know, Chimes, works for New South Wales Rugby League. He tells me that Parramatta won in 81, 2 and 3. I went there in 84 and they lost. Right. So he thinks my inclusion, not that I played many first grade games, but he thinks my involvement in the club was their detriment.
Advice. Yeah. They had a cracking side, didn't they?
Oh, it was amazing.
Plenty of talent.
Like Sterlo, Steve Ella, Eric Growth, Ray Price. Yeah. There's just Stephen Edge. Yeah. Amazing too.
You played for City? You played City first?
Yeah, or City seconds, I think.
City seconds. Well, that's a good achievement back in those days.
Back then, because the City first side was literally the
test team.
It was the New South Wales team, which was a test team.
Yeah.
So I was like, that was a good team to be in.
Yeah.
And that was good. I still remember, I actually started all right, got the ball off of first play, passed to Johnny Tobin, ran and scored, I think. And we thought this was going to be easy, and we got beat. so the country boys were pretty tough. So
at age 24, you bring down the curtain on your rugby league career. It's a pretty young age for someone so talented.
It was, and I'm like most young footy players, I want to play footy. I want to play at the highest level and just keep playing. And I wasn't able to do that, but I got the second best thing in that Terry Parker rang me purely and simply because Jenny Saunders, who was a fantastic sports doctor, had left Souths that very year at the end of 84. And I'd also dislocated my shoulder at the end of the year, so I said, I've had enough here. I'll just concentrate on work. He rang me and said, we need a doctor for 85. Will you be the doc? Mm. And I couldn't believe it because it meant that I would, 25, still be going to football. Yeah. And he said to me at the first game, or before the first game, he said, Nathan, I'll give you tickets to the corporate area at the top of the dressing room. And I said, no, I'm on a tracksuit. I'm on the sideline. Yeah. In those days, many doctors actually went to the luncheon in a coat and tie and only ran on the field if, it was a disaster. And so I said, no, I'm a player. Yeah. I'm a player's doctor. I'm sitting on the sideline. So that was fantastic to still be involved there.
At Concord before that, when you were working at Concord Hospital, were you doing general medicine, not specifically sports medicine?
As an intern resident, you do you do terms in different specialties. You couldn't do sports medicine. It didn't exist in the hospital system, but you just do general, accident emergency, cardiology, oncology, all those general medical areas.
So as you mentioned, sports medicine's on the horizon, and there was one great a doctor and another old boy of Marsland College at Randwick, Merv Cross. Did he influence you at all in getting into medicine?
Merv was not getting into medicine, but once I was in there, he was a great mentor. He started probably the sports medicine clinic concept where as an orthopaedic surgeon, he was a great surgeon and he loved operating. He was at the forefront of ACL knee reconstructive surgery before anyone else was doing it. And sports injuries, traumatic orthopaedic injuries in sport, probably only 20% need surgery. The other 80% need management. Well, Merv was smart enough to know he didn't want to manage those, so he got involved. He got people like Ken Crichton, Stuart Watson, and Stuart's still working now. Ken, unfortunately, has passed away. And I got involved with him as a young sports doctor doing all the orthopaedic non-operative medicine, which was just fantastic. Mm. And Merv was very good when I needed his help in team medicals and things like that. He was amazing.
So if we turn the clock back to the 1960s and an NRL player suffered a knee injury, it's generally, take us through what would have happened. Would it have been x-rayed and then do your best? Did they know what they were doing?
Well, they didn't understand what an ACL was. Mm. So your knee would collapse, give way, the swelling would go away in 2 weeks and you'd play again and you'd collapse again.
Yeah.
And your career would be pretty short-lived after that. Not to mention a knee full of arthritic damage at 40 years of age. So Merv had travelled across to the States to the Jack Houston Clinic, I think it was called, learnt the technique of the ACL, repairs and recons, and brought that back to Australia. He was at the forefront of sports orthopaedic surgery. It's fantastic.
So a few years ago, we'd never heard of a syndesmosis. How does that evolve? It's obviously an serious ankle injury. How does the technology evolve to identify that as that particular injury?
Well, I think the syndesmosis diagnosis became much clearer and more easier to diagnose once MRI scanning was available. Because invariably 15 years ago, if you twisted an ankle, it was an ankle sprain. And if it took 2 weeks, it was a minor one. But it was probably, if it took 6 weeks, it was going to be a syndesmosis that we didn't actually appreciate the nature of. Whereas now, an ankle injury to someone scanned the next day, we can actually say, hey, that syndesmosis is torn and it's got 3 components. We can also say, we think it's stable, it'll heal by itself, or it needs stability or stabilising with a tight rope or screw in the old days. So it's our management, it's like all aspects of medicine, sports medicine's no different. The aim in the athlete is to get back at high performance and also, if possible, get back more quickly. So that's a very important factor.
So, mate, do you ever stop and think about where MRI imaging will take us, say, 10 years' time? And you talked about how we can now identify different things due to different imaging. Can you see major changes further on down the track that will assist recovery?
What I love is 20 years ago we'd organise an MRI. Now, when you have the coaches, post-game conference, they talk about getting the MRI. So the coaches are up to speed on how the MRI is a critical part of the analysis. And also, we deal a lot in players who are nervous about an injury. You get an MRI and that can reassure them that, hey, this is, tightness, but it's not, pathological. So, it should be okay.
So you could obviously see great growth in sports medicine, and you went on and opened up the South Sydney Sports Medicine Centre. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was when I started working at Souths. I realised after 1 year that I had nowhere to work. And thankfully in that first year I was still working in the hospital system. And Henry Morris, who well at the juniors, South, he provided me a room where I could see players from the juniors and from the senior team at the South Sydney Juniors Club in that first year. And then in 86, we opened the South Sydney Sports Medicine Clinic with another well-regarded sports doctor, Grace Bryant, who did a lot of the Olympic Games sports, and 2 physios, Mark Bevan and Liz Steet.
Mm-hmm.
And that we were 32 years in operation, which was fantastic.
And what was the reason for that unfolding at the end?
Mainly because everyone was
new
getting
opportunities.
Now getting a bit older.
Right.
So I was youngest of that quartet really. So I'm still going, but most of the others have retired now.
So you also were handed the reins to the Sydney Football Stadium Sports Centre there too. You managed the facilities there for a while.
Yeah, that was good. When the stadium was first built in 88, I think, or 89, it started. They had a gold members membership, which also included free access to this state-of-the-art gymnasium, pool, tennis court facility. And they also wanted, exercise planning and a bit of a sports science approach. So they were very happy for someone like myself, who was a sports medicine practitioner, to oversee the operation of that, to make it, as safe as could be. It's a healthy exercise is pretty important.
And mate, you're still working in near the stadium there. Tell us about what you're doing now, your business there.
Obviously, the clinic's very busy, and the great thing about sports medicine, and actually the college changed its name a few years ago to exercise and health medicine, because a lot of the 20 or 30 year ago sports people are still wanting to stay healthy and exercise and walk their dog or walk along the beaches and do all those sorts of things, so that we look after. It's amazing how old some of the sports people I see in their 80s, 70s, 60s who are still quite active.
Yeah.
So the clinic is probably we specialise in musculoskeletal treatments to try to help people keep going.
So you're probably one of the best known sports doctors in the country. You've worked for South and Manly and New South Wales and Australia. You've worked for the Sydney Swans for 18 years, and you've worked for the Wallabies as their doctor.
Actually, and I was fortunate enough to be given Souths after 17 years gave me a life membership, and the Swans did as well. So
Amazing. Yeah.
that's quite an honour to get life memberships of two different codes, if you like, which were great parts of my life.
You'd have done some stitching over the years, Doc.
Actually done a lot of stitching, and because I'm sort of often available 24/7, I've done a lot of stitching at home after hours. Not that we need to talk about those scenarios.
No, occasionally a foreign order might knock on the door and ask for some help, eh?
And often the coach will say to me, when player X turns up with stitches, he'll say, "So did you see him last night?" "Yeah, stitched him up." "What happened?" "Didn't ask him." If you want to deal with that, you go and ask him, mate. I just did the work.
Hey, with the Swans, when you went in there, I mean, you obviously grew up on league and a little bit of union. I guess you had to learn the game a little bit. You're there 18 years, but by the time of your tenure there, you would have been pretty much an expert on AFL. You'd have known the game pretty well.
Actually, it was interesting when I was involved from 98, and in that early phase, Rocket was still there, and then Roosie came in as head coach. And there were a couple of people who came in. Dave Misson, expert S&C, was from cricket originally. Matty Cameron, who was more from rugby as a head physio, came in, and later on Rob Spurs came in as taking over Misso's job when he moved down to St Kilda. We were all not AFL people, and we didn't understand the madness that goes with being an AFL person and what it involves. And sometimes that's also a good thing, because we looked at some of the training concepts and principles I'm using and challenged them quite a bit to try to improve the program and to get less injuries and basically maximise performance and minimise injury. And so it was a great period, especially because, and then one of the great CEOs, Andrew Ireland, was Richard Collis, the CEO, wanted to source far and wide, and he brought Andrew Ireland down to take over as head of football. And he was a big supporter of us in the medical science department. And one of the things we also started doing was travelling overseas as a group to visit some of the best
to learn stuff,
team sports medical setups all around the world. And that was, some might call it a junket, but it was Andrew, the S&C, physio, myself, the four of us went. It was probably the best learning I've ever had in sports medicine. We went for probably 6 or 7 years running. It was fantastic.
AFL and rugby league players similar types of people?
I think, and having been involved in rugby league and AFL, you get a kid coming out of school at 18 who dreams of becoming a football player. And his dreams are broken quite often, many times, through injury, through disappointment, not being picked, things going haywire, personal problems at home, all those sorts of things. So he has to deal with all that, get to about 23 or 24 where he's physically mature and mentally stable, and then be a good player, hopefully still, and not have been cut. And then he still gets to 30 when he's got another 40 years of working life left, where he then has to work out what he wants to do. Now, that individual is the same in all the codes. And that young kid, and I've been fortunate because I've been at clubs for a long time, it's quite nice. As an example, say Adam Goods, who everyone knows in AFL, I've been to every game he's ever played for the Swans.
Wow.
in first grade, simply because I happened to be there when he started and I was still there when he finished. And that's a great thing where you see a young person like him as a kid come in, mature, have a family, have his own kids, and that's sort of, I suppose that's what happens as you get older myself, that you sit back and watch others that you've watched develop and you've had some part in that, but not a lot. But it's quite pleasing to see that.
Is he one of the most courageous players you've ever had anything to do with? And can you give us an example of his courage?
Probably the best one's 2012 grand final. Snaps his PCL in the second quarter. Comes off, and he had a PCL injury, so he said, "Hey doc, can you look at this?" And I said, "Oh, no problem, Goodsy. That's your PCL. You've had that for 2 years." He said, "But that's my other knee, doc." I said, "Oh, okay. Now you've got another one, and that's a matching pair. Don't worry about it." And he just stood up. Matty Cameron put a bit of tape around his knee for good measure, and he went on and I think actually, I think he probably kicked the goal that got us in front late in the game. But then Nick Malcheski, the great Nick, kicked the goal to put us beyond doubt of winning the 2012 premiership.
To the AFL bloke,
as in most players, for those who don't understand, tearing your PCL in your knee would normally be limping off, carried off in a stretcher, not playing another 1 hour of football.
Yeah. You'd have seen plenty of injuries in time and had to obviously go out onto the field to tend to players. What's some of the worst you've come across?
Obviously, actually, probably two AFL ones I can think of straight away. Teddy Richards, a great defensive fullback for the Swans. He got kneed in the back as he was running backwards to take a defensive mark and broke, I think, broke 4 ribs in 8 places. So his chest was all out of whack. He was coughing up blood coming out his mouth. We got him off. He ran off the ground amazingly. He obviously had a punctured lung where his chest cavity was filling up rapidly with air outside his lung, which if it keeps on happening and puts pressure on the heart stops beating, and then you stop talking, you collapse and you die. Yeah. So that's, quite a serious event that's unfolding.
You're first responder.
We're in the dressing room and we got Teddy's jumper off, and they teach us this in our, sports trauma courses. We mark the area that we think we're going to shove the catheter into his chest, just so we know the correct spot. And Teddy was looking at me saying, "What are you doing, Doc?" I said, "Don't you worry about a thing, Ted. You'll be right, mate." And thankfully, he remained conscious, and the ambulance was able to take him to hospital, so we didn't have to do an emergency puncturing of his lung to let the air out at the field. We could do it more surgically at the hospital.
So it's a life and death situation.
Yeah, thankfully it's pretty rare. Yeah. Leo Barry was another one, the great Leo, who, won the day in the 2005 premiership. He ruptured his spleen in one of the years at the Swans and ran off the field, and then suddenly turned yellow, and we raced him to hospital. I think he lost 4 litres of blood into his abdomen. So they're those. But I must admit, the sports trauma courses they insist all first responders in football teams now must do are fantastic for sort of preparing us for disaster. And you never quite know how things are going to unfold when you're in that situation. But thankfully, for me, the few times I've had the shit hit the fan, it's worked out all right.
So AFL and League are different types of sports, but similar. But leagues, they're both collision sports, but leagues probably are more of a collision sport. Are the injuries similar or different, the types of injuries that players
You'll never see an injury in one sport and not the other. So all the injuries can pertain to both codes. However, in AFL, it's more a running sport. So you see a lot more, they're more athletic. They're more like middle distance runners. So you'll see a lot more stress fractures in lower limbs, tendinitis problems, and those sorts of issues. Rugby and rugby league are high contact, physicality, and so a lot of contact injury probably takes over as the main source of the problem. It's interesting in AFL, we talk about non-contact and contact injuries, and the non-contact ones are the ones that the medical and science departments in teams really want to avoid happening because they're related to load and training methods. The contact injuries invariably are just bad luck, and teams can have guys break arms, break legs, cheekbone fractures, and that's just a coach's nightmare because there's sort of nothing you can do to prevent those. It's just...
They're both brutal sports at times because it's a contact sport. How courageous are these guys? I mean, you've played the game and it was a bit wilder when you were playing. But how much courage do you think they've got to have to be able to compete at?
Well, the most combative contact sport by far is Origin, in my view, having now done, I think, 23 years of Origin. The thing that I can't understand is the front rowers on the first carry off the kickoff of game one fight for the right to do that carry. And that's the biggest hit of the series. The first guy off the kickoff with about 10 players come in to just smash you.
So what do you think about the game thinking of banning the hit-up?
The off the kickoff?
Off the kickoff, yeah.
Well, you no doubt, being a Marston College boy, would have done physics at school, Chimes.
No, I didn't do physics. No, I did ancient history and geology.
You would have heard of Isaac Newton.
Yes.
He's fairly well known. He
yes.
He had laws of motion. The second law was force equals mass times acceleration. And that simply implies the impact force, if you've got the biggest mass on the field being the front rower, and you give him 20 metres to get maximum acceleration rather than just doing a carry off a play the ball, that is the greatest force in the game. And then if you say to the people tackling, I'll give you 25 metres to run full speed towards that bloke getting the ball, that's a massive impact force, biggest in the game. And if you said to me, is that more likely to cause injury? I'll say absolutely, related to the impact force. And then you say, but people love watching it. And I say, well, people get hurt a lot.
You're all about protecting the players, and I'm sure the NRL and other sports have conferred with you at times about different things. Tell us a little bit about concussion and how an important issue that is in the game right now.
Well, there's concussion consensus summits every 4 years run from all the world experts. And they basically, including Australians, attend those and Australian sports, and all the codes are in sync with how to manage it. And the big thing that's changed is an awareness that long-term concussion injuries can cause potential problems. That it's not cause and effect yet. There certainly seems to be a correlation, but it's not definite. And more research is happening. But the common sense approach, which isn't always scientifically based, but the common sense approach is if you do sustain a concussion, well, let's protect you from that moment thereafter until you recover. And so that's why there are strict rules in trying to get players off the field to be assessed or off the field to stay off the field if they've had a definite concussion incident. And then have a rigid program of the graduated return to play protocols to enable that player to fully recover and then return to playing contact sport. And there are strict criteria now that you have to abide by in order to tick the boxes to be allowed to return to play. So that's all good for player health and safety. It's a fantastic thing now that basically all contact sports around the world are involved in.
Change of pace, 1990, you're the Australian doctor. Kangaroo team is picked. Wally Lewis is named in that team and has to pass a medical, and you ruled him out of the tour. How'd you handle all that?
Well, I'll go back one step. Bozo was the coach of the Kangaroos for the first time in 1990, and they had a one-off game against France that season after the Origin in June. And I didn't really know Bozo well at all. And Ken Arthurson had kindly allowed me to be the Australian team doctor after Bill Monaghan retired. And I was only 30. So I'm going to the Australian team medical in June. Bradley Clyde, the great Canberra player, the best lock forward in the game by a country mile. Finishes a game for Canberra, comes to the medical on the Monday for the game against France in Parks, I think we're playing, and his knee was swollen. I said, "Oh, Clydie," you talk about toughness. I said, "Clydie, what happened to your knee?" "Oh, I heard it late in the game, and I ran around for 10 minutes. It's all right, nothing wrong with it." And Merv Cross, who's the ACL guru, had taught me quite a bit about it. Felt his knee, ACL not there, unstable, no ACL in his knee. And I'm thinking, and Bozo didn't know me well. I was nervous of Bozo. And I've looked at him and I said, "Mate, Clydie's got an ACL. He can't play against France. But more so, he's out of the tour. He won't go, no, this is a recon. This is 6 to 9 months." And I could see Bozo thinking, "Oh, this young doctor's got no idea. He's just totally..."
Strap him up.
He's got no idea. So then the great Merv, I rang him straight away. I said, "Can I send Clydie to you? I need help.
Back up.
Can you just tell me what you reckon?" He said, "Yeah, it's gone, mate." So that was unfortunate. But the same happened with the Wally scenario. He'd broken his arm probably a month before. He made a game, came back for the Broncos in one game in the semis, I think, with a massive arm pad on. I was at the SFS watching him at the time. And I think he played like the old Kenny Wilson did in the day, where in a dinner suit, he didn't get tackled or be tackled. He just kicked the ball around. So he had his own medical before the team medical, mainly because he was a captain. He was the main player. It was really important to know if he was available or not. And so we had some x-rays done. And I looked at the x-rays and his forearm was still clearly angulated and broken. And but once again, I needed some help. And I was at the football stadium and I rang Merv. I said, "Where are you, Merv?" He said, "I'm just finished my list at Longueville, driving to North Sydney." I said, "Can you drop into the footy stadium?" I'm in the gym because we're involved there. He walked in the gym. I showed him the x-ray. In Merv's sort of, pretty gruff sort of manner, he said, "It's broken." He said, "You want me to do anything else?" I said, "No, that's all I need, Merv. Thank you." And he walked out and I said to Wally, "It's still broken." And it must have been in Wally's defence. He knew it wasn't right. And he was keen to, be given until the first test, which was another 6 weeks away. But the Bozo and certainly Arco, the rules for the medical were you had to be available for the first game.
So was there bad blood between Wally and you? How did he take it?
No,
You knew him.
I knew him. We
reasonably
sort of
well.
were the same age, and we played a little bit of football against each other. And he also played rugby at school, so we knew him through some mutual rugby mates. And he was okay about it until he got a microphone in his hand. That changed things a little bit. But one-on-one, he was fine. And what was nice, even though he didn't go on the Kangaroo tour, the next season in 91, I think we had a series against New Zealand, and he was picked for that series. So I wasn't, thankfully, responsible for him never playing for Australia again, but certainly.
Is there an easy way to tell a player, they've sustained a career-ending injury? How do you go about managing that?
No, that's not easy, never. That's, as I said, most players, when you work in sports medicine, you have to understand, and it helps, you don't have to play sport, perhaps like I did, although it helps a little bit, but you have to understand the mentality of the athlete or the person playing sport. They live for their sport, they love their sport, and to actually be told, "Look, you can't do this anymore," is devastating. And you have to appreciate that.
As a doc, have you had to tell people they've got a terminal illness at all throughout your career?
Most of the time, I'm trying to think, I've certainly had patients in the clinic who weren't professional players or athletes playing sport who unexpectedly with an MRI have a tumour, in a limb or have something which is devastating apart from what we're suspecting. And so that's, I don't think I'd be cut out to work in oncology and doing that day in, day out, because it's really tough, really tough.
What about reviving people? Have you had to revive people throughout your career?
Probably the yes is the answer. Probably the most notable one at a game was, I think it was Wally Jackson was a fantastic long-term head trainer for the Swans, and at the SCG, he was sitting next to me, and he suddenly collapsed on the ground, cardiac arrest, and so on the side of the field, we started doing CPR, then got the defibrillator, and tried to revive him, and unfortunately, despite numerous, efforts at trying to revive him, he never regained consciousness.
How do you cope with something like that?
That was pretty hard because he was the players, the long-term players knew him really well and knew him he was a very personable person, and all the staff knew and liked him. Like most head trainers, he knew everything about every player, their family scenarios, and he was also always a character. So he was a big loss for the Swans, and it knocked the team around that year, I must admit.
Doc, your passport would have some stamps in it, wouldn't it? You've been some places, haven't you?
Actually, what I did love in the latter part of my career, because as I said earlier, I love going to Coogee watching the rugby team, and always getting up early, 1 o'clock on a Sunday morning to watch the games at Twickenham, Cardiff Arms Park, Murrayfield, all the great places that the Wallabies used to play overseas. Then Michael Checker rang me one day to get me involved with the Wallabies, which I'm forever indebted to him for.
Yeah.
And we had 4 years of great travel to all those sort of places, and he was a great character, Check.
Because they're away a good part of the year, I think.
Actually, they go in blocks of time. They might have a 2-week block playing. The spring tour is different. That's like a 6-week tour, where you play 4 matches. But most of the mid-year games were, maybe a game against Argentina and South Africa, and then back home. You just fly around the world or under the world. Might play New Zealand here, home and away in a 2-week block, and then you have a week or 2 off. So it was a bit it was manageable still with the clinic and working, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. What about family, mate? You've got a tribe of kids. They keep you busy. How have you managed to, and obviously got a lovely wife in Kerry, how have you managed to juggle, because she was a flight attendant. You're a doctor.
That's past tense.
Past tense, was it?
Lovely Kerry still flies.
She's still flying.
Still does, yeah. She's still...
How do you juggle
Recently
them?
did the A380 thing, so she's on the
Really?
big planes now. She does part-time flying, and she picks and chooses, but it's been quite handy if you're probably aware of staff travel.
Yes.
The kids quite often, if I'm in a different part of the world, or certainly Kerry or the kids, have tucked over to many moments and been part of some of the good sporting moments overseas quite regularly. So it's worked well.
Is being a dad something you've thrived on?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it.
What's the secret to it? Share it. Where do you get your energy from?
Actually, I'm fortunate working in sport. Like I said earlier, I've spent 40 years now as a team doctor, going to the footy. And for 10 years when I first did Souths, it was voluntary. And then someone decided to pay me. And don't tell him, I hope this isn't going too far, but I'd still do it for nothing.
Yeah, right.
But now I get paid well to do it.
Yeah.
But it's one of the great pleasures of my life, sitting, watching a footy game and being front and centre. And the thing I love, even though we're talking about MRI and the great science of different investigations, when you get someone coming off a football field and you have an instant moment to make a diagnosis without the help of any other tools apart from your own clinical skills and your intuition, and the coach is yelling at you from the speakers upstairs, you've got everyone yelling at you about do we interchange him or not, or her, and then you make a call, he'll be right to go, put him back on. And they go back on and survive and score the winning try. And you sit back and say,
It's your call.
Job well done.
Yeah.
Most of the time, that's how it works. Occasionally, they go back and it's a stuff up. They come off injured again. You've used up 2 interchanges.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I love the most, the intensity of sport and the love of it and being still involved. So if you said to me, how long are you going to do that for? I'll do it forever. it's just fantastic.
When you see the doc start playing with the player's leg and feeling for instability in the knee, how sure are you in that moment how serious the injury might be? This is prior to scans.
Quite often, very assured, and certainly with ACL and MCLs, and PCL, they're pretty obvious injuries in terms of the looseness in the knee that is new and wasn't there before. But the other simple test, which I often try to teach young doctors, is regardless of what you think it is, if they can't run, they can't play. So if the athlete can run around and still perform and you're not so certain what's wrong with it, so you can't definitely say it's terrible, you just put them back out there. But if you're definite about the bad diagnosis, well, obviously you've got to protect him and bring him off or her off.
I guess you can't always be certain. Doctors can make mistakes, can't they?
Oh, some doctors do, surely.
It's not you.
Yeah, no, of course they do. And so and the thing I love about the sports person's mentality is playing sport is high risk. You get injured. We just spoke about people who might die. So we're not office workers sitting at our desk nice and safely, not in trouble of anything bad happening. So sport is high risk. And when you get injured, the athlete wants to take risks about getting back sooner. And so part of the skill of the sports doctor and the intuition you need is to judge whether this particular injury, which is a 6-weeker, might be able to get back in 4, as you see, the athlete got the right mentality to cope with it. Different people can and can't. You've got to know the player, know their mentality. That intuition is a real skill, which the good sport there are very many great sports doctors in Australia, and you have to have that skill where you just have a good sixth sense that I think he's all right, let's get him out there, or I think he's ready to play and not re-injure.
If you hadn't got that mark in the HSC, have you ever thought about what you might have done with your life?
Actually, I do laugh when year 10, I was working in the fruit shop Thursday afternoon, packing shelves, and the Greek guy who ran it said to me, "Nathan, you're the best shop packer I've ever seen. Leave school and I'll give you a full-time job." So if I wasn't doing medicine, I'd be packing shelves.
Still packing shelves, you reckon?
And being the best person at it.
A good mate of yours, Rod Churchill, whose dad was Clive Churchill,
used to drive me around.
I was going to ask, what was your relationship with Clive? Did you get to know him?
Rod was a great mate from young days, and his old man happened to be Clive. And Clive used to, and because I didn't have a car, I'd sort of tag along with Rod, and Clive would pick us up and drive us here and there, and then suddenly, the South Sydney first grade team would be jumping in the car or at his place. So I dreamed of playing for Souths. And in my young years as a teenager, I'm mixing with all these players that were my heroes. And I remember in 78 when I first went to Souths, and I moved up to second grade, and then a few of the big names Jack had moved back to second grade. I played a game with Bobby McCarthy in the second row. And have you ever seen how big Macca's torso is? I couldn't get anywhere near my arm around his torso to grab his other side. Yeah. He was the biggest human being I've ever played with. So, but that was fantastic.
How does the doc relax? What do you do in your spare time, if you've got any?
Usually watch Jude's highlight videos or talk to Tommy Gibbs about football.
Right.
Yeah.
Spend some time with the kids.
Yeah. We do love my daughter got married last year.
Oh, lovely.
So that's fantastic.
Yep.
So we had it was the year before. So it's a year and a half ago now. And Nick Gibbs, I was playing all his sport as well.
Beautiful.
So it's good.
Jude plays rugby, quite an accomplished player. Won a premiership last year.
Yeah, just tough point that, John. Just got beaten by a point last year.
Just got beaten.
2 points the year before.
Wow.
But he's up at the Reds now. Les Kiss, rugby league legend, who's now
highly regarded.
Yeah, rugby coach.
Doc, in law, there's all these TV shows that lawyers love watching. In medicine, there's a lot of doctor shows. Have you ever watched ER or any of those shows? You into them?
I can't stand them.
Really?
Reminds me too much of working in accident emergency as a young doctor.
Really?
It's chaotic, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolute chaos.
What was it like working in emergency? Frantic?
Well, the worst thing is, like on a football field, I suppose you've got 13 players or 15 each side or 18 each side, depending on what game you're playing. So there's only so many bad things that can happen at any one point. In an A&E, you could have 10 people come in who are on death's door at the same time, and it's just pandemonium. And that's a great skill of the people who run A&Es medically and the nursing staff. They know how to sort of manage all that.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I never had to deal with any of that. I was too junior.
You mentioned Mum before. She's obviously the captain of the ship and massive influence in the Gibbs family. How lucky are you to have landed with Pam?
Well, I think Pam's 92 now, still lives at home.
Wow.
I love my mum, and she's very smart. And, we did have her after she broke her hip. She was in respite care for a while, and we were saying to her, oh, Pam, you might stay here. This could be a good place to stay. They've got bingo on at 10 o'clock. You go, I'm not playing that stupid game with all those stupid old people. I said, Pam, I think you're one of them, though, aren't you? And that didn't go over too well. So
Pam worked for you a long while on reception.
Yeah, early days. She was...
so if you went to visit the doctor, you got to see Pam.
Pam Gibbs, yeah. And she had... you obviously spent some time there, Chimes.
Oh, yes, I used to pop in.
Your young sporting
career.
A
lot of problems, yeah, the old days.
Yeah.
Doc, fantastic career. More to come. What's next for Doc Gibbs?
What I love is... Actually, the best thing is... Actually, I did even a few years ago, I did the NRLW Chooks team for their inaugural premiership, which was fantastic. Yeah, and that was great fun to see how passionate the girls are about playing rugby league.
Yeah.
It's just incredible. And that's gone from strength to strength, the girls' competition and the origin of the girls. I'm actually covering... I think I'm covering the first or second game, or their first Allianz game of the girls with their head doc. I'll be helping that out, so that'll be good. And I think I was doing the stats because Tommy Gibbs asked about it. I think I've done 23 series with the men's origin.
Yeah.
One drawn series. Of the 22 others, 11 all.
Really?
New South Wales, Queensland,
Very
11
tight.
all. So there's nothing in it.
And are you back this year for Origin?
Back the year. I had your man, Loz.
Yeah.
He's used to look after Loz.
He's like a son to me. Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And it'd be great to work with Craig Bellamy. I can't wait for that. I met him at a little meeting we had recently.
Yeah.
That'll be fantastic.
Vibe's good. Hopefully they can do the job this year.
Yeah.
Doc, it's been an amazing chat.
Mate.
Some great stories.
Yeah, I love it, Chimes. And I should interview you about your career.
Yeah, well, we might do that later.
Yeah.
Doc, thanks very much for joining us on Chiming In.
Thank you, mate.
Good on
Cheers. Sweet.